She was just a cleaning lady, invisible to everyone, but one night she uncovered a $10 million mistake that could destroy a billionaire CEO. What happened next? No one could ever imagine. Hello, my friends. Before we begin this amazing story, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how your day is going, all right? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The scent was a familiar, tripartite assault on the senses. The sharp, sterile tang of industrial-grade lemon polish, the ghost of burnt coffee from a pot emptied hours ago, and the faint, ozonic hum of dormant electronics. It was the sterile perfume of power, a fragrance that clung to the 50th floor of the Viridian Trust Tower long after its occupants had descended to the glittering, chaotic streets of Manhattan below. Outside the panoramic window of Julian Davenport's corner office, the city sprawled like a treasure chest of scattered diamonds, a cold and impossibly distant galaxy. But for 24-year-old Maya Rodriguez, whose reflection was a faint, weary smudge on the impeccable glass, the entire universe was contained within the solitary, blue-white glow of the CEO's unlocked monitor. The silence of the vast, empty floor was profound, broken only by the rhythmic squeak of her janitorial cart's wheel and the clandestine, furtive click-clack of her own fingers on the keyboard she had just meticulously sanitized. This stolen time was her most fiercely guarded secret, a fragile bridge between the life she had and the one she so desperately craved. Her online data analytics course, a series of video lectures and complex problem sets, was her lifeline, a clandestine education pursued in the hushed, cathedral-like offices of the very people who never saw her face, only the results of her labor. She was deep into a module on predictive modeling, the professor's disembodied voice a soothing murmur from the cheap earbuds tucked beneath her hair, when a minimize file on the desktop snagged her attention. It was labeled simply, almost arrogantly, Acquisition Report Q4. Her breath hitched. This was the digital equivalent of a king's private diary, a document containing strategies and figures that could shape markets. For a fleeting moment, her disciplined mind, the one that saw the world as a series of logical inputs and outputs, screamed at her to close the laptop, to retreat to the safety of her anonymity. But curiosity, a dangerous and incandescent spark, had already taken root. It was a hunger to know, to understand the intricate machinery of this world she could only ever observe from the periphery. With a tremor in her hand that she willed into stillness, she guided the cursor and clicked. The file blossomed open, revealing a blinding sea of numbers, a meticulously organized spreadsheet of assets, liabilities, and projections. It was beautiful in its complexity, a language she was just beginning to truly understand. Her eyes scanned the columns, her mind automatically processing the flow of capital until a single cell, highlighted in a garish, angry red, seemed to leap from the screen, screaming for attention. A discrepancy, a simple input error, perhaps. But as she traced its origins, cross-referencing it with the corresponding ledgers in the document, a cold knot of dread began to form in her stomach. She did the math in her head. Her brain, sharpened by years of calculating grocery bills to the last cent, working faster than any machine. Then, disbelieving her own conclusion, she did it again using the system's calculator, her fingers slick with a sudden cold sweat. The result was immutable, catastrophic. $10 million. Not misplaced, vanished. An accounting black hole created by a single, disastrous keystroke in a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, washed over her. Someone at the absolute pinnacle of this corporate empire had made a mistake of such magnitude it could end careers, perhaps even cripple the deal itself. And she, Maya Rodriguez, the invisible girl who cleaned the smudges from their glass walls and emptied their trash, was the only person on Earth who knew. Just then, the soft, distant ding of the executive elevator echoed through the silent floor, and her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. The ride back to Queens was a blur of screeching train wheels and the kaleidoscopic flash of graffiti-laced tunnel walls. Her mind a frantic vortex of numbers and fear. The weight of her discovery felt like a physical object lodged in her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Stepping into the cramped but immaculately clean apartment she shared with her parents and younger brother was like entering another dimension. Here, the air was thick, not with the scent of ambition and polish, but with the warm, savory aroma of her mother's arroz con pollo and the faint underlying medicinal smell that perpetually clung to her father's sick room. "Mia, you look pale. Are you eating enough?" her mother, Eleanor, asked, her brow furrowed with a concern that was as constant as the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Eleanor's hands, though chapped and worn, moved with a practiced grace as she stirred a pot on the stove, a small bastion of warmth and normalcy against a world that felt increasingly precarious. Maya forced a smile, the gesture feeling alien on her face. "I'm fine, Ma. Just a long day." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. How could she explain that her day had involved staring into a $10 million abyss in a world her mother could barely imagine? The stakes of that digital void were terrifyingly real here, in this small apartment, where a single unexpected medical bill could trigger a cascade of financial disasters. She walked past the living room, where her brother Leo was sprawled on the floor, homework spread around him, and peered into her father's room. Javier Rodriguez lay propped up by a mound of pillows, the once robust frame that had carried her on his shoulders, now frail and thin. A chronic respiratory illness, a cruel parting gift from his years working construction, had stolen his strength and their family's stability, forcing Maya to drop out of her scholarship-funded computer science program at CCNY to take on any work she could find. He met her gaze and managed a weak, wheezing smile. "My brilliant girl," he whispered, the effort costing him. "Don't work so hard. You'll wear yourself out." The irony was a bitter pill. It was for him, for them, that she pushed herself, cleaning floors by night and studying data streams in the stolen hours of the morning. All of it a desperate gamble to reclaim the future that had been snatched away from them. That night, sleep offered no escape. She lay in her small bed, the worn-out cover of her data analytics textbook, a familiar comfort under her fingertips, the numbers from the report burning behind her. Eyelids. The $10 million error wasn't just a corporate problem, it was a moral one. Ignoring it felt like a betrayal of the very principles of logic and order she was so devoted to. But reporting it, that was an act of unthinkable audacity, a cleaning lady daring to point out a flaw in the emperor's meticulously tailored suit. It could get her fired, blacklisted, and destroy the fragile lifeline she provided for her family. The next morning, the decision felt less like a choice and more like a compulsion. Armed with a potent cocktail of terror and resolve, Maya altered her cleaning route, arriving at the executive suite just as the day was beginning, when the CEO was likely to be alone. She saw him through the glass walls of his office, a tall, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his focus entirely consumed by the tablet in his hand. Julian Davenport moved with an aura of detached, almost cold authority. He was not a man who invited interruption. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed her cart forward, the squeaky wheels sounding like a siren in the quiet hallway. She took a deep breath and knocked softly on the open door frame. He didn't look up. Yes? The word was clipped, impatient, not meant for a person, but for a task to be dealt with. "Mr. Davenport, sir," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, a startlingly clear, piercing blue, swept over her. But it was a look devoid of recognition. He wasn't seeing her, Maya Rodriguez. He was seeing a blue uniform, a symbol of a function, as impersonal as the ficus plant in the corner. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir, but I I think there might be something wrong with the Q4 acquisition report, a calculation error. She felt a flush of heat creep up her neck as she spoke, the words sounding presumptuous and insane even to her own ears. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps disbelief, crossed his features. He placed his tablet down with deliberate slowness. The acquisition report, and you are... The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken condescension. I'm Maya, from the cleaning staff. The title landed with a thud between them. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, he simply stared. Then a cool, dismissive smile touched his lips. I appreciate your diligence, but I assure you, Viridian Trust has entire teams of highly paid analysts who vet these documents. I'm sure everything is in order. He picked up his tablet, a clear gesture of dismissal. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. He had not just rejected her warning, he had invalidated her very existence, reducing her intellect to the level of her menial task. But sir, it's a $10 million discrepancy, she insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. I saw it. In cell 14C of the liabilities ledger. He finally looked at her again, and this time his expression was harder, colder. You were on my computer. The question was soft, but it carried the chilling weight of an accusation. The air crackled with her transgression. She could be fired on the spot, escorted out by security for this alone. I was just cleaning and it was open, she stammered, her courage evaporating into pure fear. Thank you for your concern, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You may go now. Defeated, Maya retreated, her face burning, the condescending finality of his words echoing in her ears. She had been a fool too. You think she could cross the chasm that separated their worlds? She spent the rest of her shift in a daze of shame and anger, promising herself she would erase the memory, bury the knowledge, and retreat back into the comfortable invisibility she had always known. That night, as she was helping her brother Leo with his algebra homework, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown, blocked number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but some strange instinct made her answer. Hello? She said, her voice cautious. Is this Maya Rodriguez? The voice on the other end was deep, clipped and instantly familiar. It was him, Julian Davenport. Her blood ran cold. This was it. The call to tell her not to bother coming in tomorrow, that her services were no longer required. This is she managed to say, her throat tightening. There was a pause, filled with the faint static of the connection. I'm at a coffee shop, the Daily Grind, on Lexington and 48th. I need you to meet me here in 1 hour. It's important. The line went dead before she could respond, leaving her staring at her phone in stunned silence. The request was bizarre, the tone urgent. An hour later, dressed in her nicest pair of jeans and a simple sweater that suddenly felt shabby and inadequate, she walked into the brightly lit coffee shop. He was sitting in a secluded booth in the back, away from the windows, looking utterly out of place in his expensive suit amidst the casual late-night crowd. He hadn't touched the coffee in front of him. As she slid into the seat opposite him, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. His blue eyes were intense, searching her face as if seeing it for the first time. You were right, he said, his voice low. Cell 14C. A decimal point misplaced during a data transfer. It created a $10 million hole in our valuation. My entire team of highly paid analysts missed it. But you, the cleaning lady, you found it. The way he said cleaning lady was different now. It wasn't an insult, but a statement of incredulous fact. Maya could only nod, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. How? How did you know what you were even looking at? That's a complex acquisition model. The question wasn't an accusation anymore. It was one of genuine, grudging curiosity. I'm studying, she said, finding her voice. Data science, online courses. A brief, unreadable expression flickered across his face. He was silent for a long moment, assessing her, the gears turning behind his cool facade. "I have a problem, Ms. Rodriguez," he finally said, the formal address feeling strange. "This error is a symptom of a much larger issue with our due diligence process. If our competitors or, God forbid, the sellers find out about this level of carelessness, it could jeopardize the entire acquisition. I need to fix it, and I need to do it quietly. Which brings me to you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm offering you a job, junior data analyst. The position doesn't officially exist yet. You'll report directly to me. The salary will be $100,000 a year." The number hung in the air between them, so immense, so utterly preposterous, that Maya felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. $100,000. It was more money than her father had ever made in a single year, a sum that could erase their debts, pay for the best medical care, secure Leo's future, and give her a life she had only ever dreamed of. It was a lifeline, a miracle spun from a nightmare. But she could see the catch in the rigid set of his jaw, the hard look in his eyes. There were always conditions. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "The catch," he said, leaning back, "is secrecy. Absolute, unequivocal secrecy. No one can know how you were hired. No one can know about your previous employment with the company. As far as anyone is concerned, you were headhunted from a small tech firm. Your background is your own business, but your origin story at Viridian starts tomorrow morning on the 48th floor. The second rule is that our relationship is to be strictly, and I mean strictly, professional. You are my analyst. I am your boss. Nothing more. This arrangement is unorthodox, a massive risk for me. Any deviation from these rules, and it's over. Do you understand?" The offer was a gilded cage, a chance to prove herself, but on his terms, shrouded in a lie. It was a world of power and money, but also one of deception and precariousness. She thought of her father's labored breathing, of the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, of the patronizing, dismissive look on Julian's face just that morning. This was her chance to fight back, not with anger, but with the one thing he now had to acknowledge, her competence. "I understand," she said, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. "I accept." Her first day as a junior analyst felt like an out-of-body experience. The transition from her drab, functional cleaning uniform to the modest but professional navy blue blazer and slacks she'd bought at a thrift store felt like donning a costume for a play she hadn't rehearsed. The 48th floor was a world away from the executive suite's solemn quiet. It was a bustling, open-plan space, humming with the low murmur of phone calls, the clatter of keyboards, and an undercurrent of ambitious energy. Julian had arranged everything with unnerving efficiency. A temporary ID badge, a brand new laptop, and a desk in a small cubicle were all waiting for her. He introduced her to the department head with a brief, non-committal explanation about her being a new hire for a special project, a statement that was met with curious but accepting nods. The imposter syndrome was a suffocating weight, a constant voice in her head screaming that she didn't belong, that at any moment someone would tap her on the shoulder and expose her as a fraud. She spent the morning poring over the data sets Julian had sent her, the familiar logic of the numbers, a comforting anchor in a sea of anxiety. It was late in the afternoon when a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up into a face that was all sharp angles and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be the new hire," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but with a steel edge she recognized from a distance. It was Marcus Thorne, the chief operating officer, a man whose picture was on the company's leadership page. He was Julian's second in command. "Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, a little too firm. "Welcome to the snake pit," he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Julian keeps his cards close to his chest, didn't even mention he was bringing someone new on board for his pet project. His eyes roamed over her, a quick, dismissive appraisal that took in her inexpensive clothes and the slight tremble in her hands. He leaned against her cubicle wall, feigning a casual air that felt utterly predatory. "So where exactly did you say you worked before this?" I don't believe I recognize the name of the firm Julian mentioned. The question was a scalpel, disguised as a pleasantry, designed to cut her open and see what was inside. The entire floor seemed to fade away, and it was just her and him, the hunter and the cornered prey, on her very first day. The silence in the small cubicle stretched taut, thick with unspoken unchallenge. Marcus Thorne's smile remained plastered on his face, a work of predatory artistry, while his eyes, cold and calculating, dissected her every flicker of hesitation. The entire bustling floor, with its symphony of productive noise, seemed to fade into a muted background hum, leaving Maya trapped in the sharp, focused spotlight of his inquiry. Her mind, which just moments ago had been calmly navigating complex data streams, was now a chaotic whirlwind of panic. The fabricated story. Julian had provided a vague reference to a boutique tech firm called Innovate Analytics, felt flimsy and transparent under Marcus's intense scrutiny. She could feel the blood draining from her face, the lie a clumsy foreign object on her tongue. To her left, she could hear two senior analysts whispering, their curious glances feeling like physical prods. She was an anomaly, an unknown variable in their predictable corporate equation, and Marcus was intent on solving for X. Taking a shaky, almost imperceptible breath, she summoned an image of her father's tired but proud smile, the silent reminder of what was at stake. "It was a very small startup, Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice emerging surprisingly steady, betraying none of the frantic terror seizing her insides. "We specialized in predictive modeling for hyperlocal retail markets. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. We were acquired by a larger competitor, and our team was dissolved. I was freelancing when Mr. Davenport found my portfolio. The details were just plausible enough, a carefully constructed blend of industry buzzwords and dismissive modesty designed to be a dead end." Marcus's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter, a sign that while he had no immediate grounds to challenge her, his suspicion had only sharpened. "How fascinating," he murmured, the word dripping with insincerity. A diamond in the rough. Julian always did have an eye for unconventional talent. The emphasis was a subtle but deliberate jab, painting her as a curiosity, a risky bet. He pushed himself off the cubicle wall. "Well, welcome to Viridian, Maya. Try not to get eaten alive." With a final, lingering look that promised this was only the beginning of his investigation, he turned and walked away, his polished Italian shoes clicking a menacing rhythm on the floor. Maya sank back into her chair, her entire body trembling, the temporary ID badge clipped to her blazer, feeling as heavy and fraudulent as a stolen jewel. The following weeks were a grueling exercise in duality. By day, Maya inhabited a world of sleek glass, whispered conversations she couldn't decipher, and a corporate vernacular that felt like a foreign language. She ate her packed lunch alone at her desk, acutely aware of the furtive glances and hushed tones that followed her whenever she walked to the coffee machine. She was the ghost at the feast, present in form, but invisible in substance to the Ivy League graduates and seasoned professionals who saw her as Julian's strange, unqualified pet project. They spoke of EBITDA, leverage buyouts, and synergy with a casual fluency that left her reeling, her imposter syndrome a constant, nauseating companion. Yet, when the sun dipped below the New Jersey skyline and the office floors emptied out, a transformation occurred. The intimidating corporate tower became her sanctuary, her true classroom. Late at night, working alongside Julian in the stark, quiet expanse of his 50th floor office, she came alive. Here, the pretense and politics melted away, leaving only the pure, unadulterated language of data. They would work for hours, fueled by coffee from a high-end machine she was still hesitant to use, surrounded by glowing monitors that reflected the glittering city lights outside. It was during one of these sessions, while analyzing consumer behavior for the acquisition target, a chain of mid-range department stores, that she found her voice. The other analysts had built a model predicting a 15% growth in sales based on aspirational marketing. But Maya saw a flaw, not in their math, but in their understanding of the customer. "They're missing the point," she said softly, pointing to a data cluster on the screen. "Their model assumes the target customer wants luxury, but look at this. The highest-selling items aren't the designer knockoffs, they're the durable school uniforms, the affordable kitchenware, the buy-one-get-one-free deals on household essentials." She looked at Julian, her passion overriding her nervousness. Their customer isn't saving up for a fancy handbag. She's a mother trying to make her paycheck stretch another 2 days. She's buying for her family's needs, not her own wants. If we market to her reality, not her fantasy, the growth potential isn't 15%, it's closer to 30. Julian was silent, staring at the screen, and then at her. He saw not just the cleaner he'd dismissed, but a strategist with a perspective his entire team of privileged analysts lacked. It was a raw, ground-level insight born from a life of necessity, a viewpoint he had never considered. He picked up his expensive fountain pen, a sleek silver object that was a symbol of his status and authority, and handed it to her. "Show me," he said, his voice quiet with a newfound respect. "Model it out. Use my pen." The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it felt monumental, a passing of a torch, an acknowledgement of her, worth that resonated far deeper than any paycheck. The true test came 2 weeks later. It was an exclusive dinner with a key group of investors at a restaurant so opulent it made Maya's head spin. The air was thick with the scent of money, perfume, and seared scallops. She was seated at the far end of the table, a silent observer in a thrift store dress that had seemed elegant in her bedroom, but now felt like a cheap costume. Marcus Thorne, seated near the head of the table, made a point of ignoring her, directing his charming anecdotes and confident projections to the investors and Julian. The main point of contention was the very department store chain Maya had been analyzing. One of the primary investors, a shrewd older man named Mr. Harrington, was deeply skeptical. "I don't see the growth potential, Julian," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "The retail market is contracting. These mid-level consumers are being squeezed. Why should we bet on them?" Julian and Marcus launched into a volley of well-rehearsed corporate jargon about market penetration and brand synergy, but their words were slick and hollow, failing to land with the experienced investor. Maya watched Julian's jaw tighten, a subtle sign of his frustration. She could feel the deal and the foundation of her new life teetering on the edge of this man's doubt. Then, in a move that drew a sharp, incredulous look from Marcus, Julian turned the attention to her. "Maya," he said, his voice cutting through the strained conversation, "you've been looking at this demographic closer than anyone. What's your take?" Every eye at the table swiveled to her. It was a terrifying, exhilarating moment. Her heart hammered in her chest, but as she looked at the skeptical faces, she didn't see powerful investors. She saw people who, like her former colleagues, simply didn't understand the world they were trying to profit from. "Mr. Harrington," she began, her voice clear and steady, "you're right. These consumers are being squeezed, but that's exactly why this is a good investment." She leaned forward, forgetting her nervousness, forgetting the ludicrously expensive plate in front of her. "We're not selling them luxury. We're selling them dignity. We're offering a mother the ability to buy her son a new pair of school shoes that won't fall apart in 2 months. We're giving a father a chance to buy a reliable coffee maker so he can have a hot cup before his 6 a.m. shift. These aren't aspirational purchases. They are small, essential victories in a difficult life. The data shows their loyalty isn't to a brand name, it's to value and durability. If Viridian can honor that, if we can show them that we see them and respect their struggle, they won't just be customers, they will be the most loyal base you could ever ask for. She finished, her cheeks flushed, her chest heaving slightly from the impassioned speech. The table was silent. Mr. Harrington stared at her, his shrewd eyes searching her face. Then a slow smile spread across his lips. He lifted his wine glass. "To dignity," he said, looking directly at Julian. "You've got your funding, and you, young lady," he added, nodding at Maya, "have a very bright future." The car ride back was thick with an unspoken energy. The professional barrier between them, already weakened by their late-night work sessions, seemed to have crumbled completely amidst the adrenaline of their shared victory. Instead of having the driver take her straight to the subway station, Julian told him to head for the west side. "Let's walk," he said, the words more of a statement than a question. They found themselves on the High Line, the elevated park, a serene green ribbon winding through the city's architecture. Below them, the traffic was a river of light. Around them, the gentle breeze carried the distant sounds of the city. For a long time, they walked in a comfortable silence, the unspoken "thank you" hanging in the air. "I've never seen anyone silence a room like that," Julian finally said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You weren't just presenting data, you were telling the truth." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. "It's easy to tell the truth when it's all you know," she replied, looking out at the view. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious, the cool CEO mask completely gone. "My father built this company. From nothing," he said, the admission seeming to cost him something. "He believed in seeing value where others saw none. He would have been very impressed tonight." It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her, a small, fragile glimpse into the man behind the title. In that moment, he wasn't Julian Davenport, CEO of Viridian Trust. He was just a man, lonely in his position, craving a genuine connection. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with a magnetic pull. She could see the fatigue in his eyes, but also a spark of something else, something directed at her that was warm and deeply human. The second rule, a strictly professional relationship, was not just broken. It felt like a distant, irrelevant memory from another lifetime. He took a small step closer, and she thought, with a terrifying, thrilling certainty, that he was going to kiss her. But the moment was shattered by the buzz of his phone. He pulled it out, his face hardening as he read the screen, the CEO mask snapping back into place. "It's Marcus," he said, his tone once again clipped and distant. "There's a problem." The spell was broken, the fragile intimacy vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Marcus's attack came 3 days later, and it was more brutal and public than Maya could have ever imagined. Julian had called an emergency meeting in the main boardroom to discuss a new, aggressive timeline for the acquisition, a direct result of Harrington's renewed enthusiasm. The room was filled with the firm's top executives and analysts, a formidable audience of sharks. Maya sat near the end of the long, polished table, trying to make herself as small as possible. The meeting was proceeding smoothly until Marcus, with the practiced ease of a seasoned predator, took the floor. "While I applaud the new timeline," he began, his gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on Maya, "I feel it's my duty to raise a concern about the integrity of the data modeling that this entire strategy is based on, specifically the unorthodox methodology our newest analyst has employed." He smiled, that chilling, humorless smile. "Maya, could you please walk the board through the application of the Pharma-French 3-factor model to your projections? I'm sure we'd all be fascinated to hear how you've adapted such a foundational academic principle to this particular data set." The name meant nothing to her. It was a deliberate academic trap, a piece of prestigious, theoretical Knowledge she would have learned in a top-tier MBA program, but not in her practical, skills-based online courses. The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The silence in the room was deafening. The other analysts exchanged smirks. She could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her, feel their judgment, their dismissal. She was being exposed, vivisected on the altar of corporate elitism. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment longer, twisting the knife. "No, nothing to add?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps your education at... what was the name of that firm again? Innovate Analytics? Perhaps they skipped over the fundamentals." The humiliation was absolute, a searing wave of heat that left her feeling stripped bare and utterly worthless. She looked to Julian, who sat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He said nothing. The meeting concluded shortly after, the air thick with her failure, numb with shame. Maya gathered her things, avoiding the pitying and scornful looks of her colleagues. As she was about to flee the room, Julian's voice cut through the haze. "Maya, my office, now." His tone was cold, impartial, leaving her with no clue as to her fate. As she made the long walk to his office, the door clicking shut behind her with an awful finality, she was certain of only one thing. Her miraculous, impossible dream was about to come to a crashing end. The walk to Julian's office on the 50th floor was the longest, most agonizing journey of Maya's life. Each step echoed the finality of a guillotine's descent, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. The cool, impartial tone of his summons had offered no comfort, no hint of the verdict to come. She pushed open the heavy glass door to find him not behind his imposing desk, but standing by the vast panoramic window, his back to her, staring down at the city lights that had just begun their nightly performance. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck all the air from her lungs. She stood just inside the doorway, clutching the strap of her bag, a condemned prisoner awaiting her sentence. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble, nothing like the cold dismissal she had expected. "That was a calculated, vicious little piece of theater," he said, still not turning around. "To use your education, your background, against you in a public forum, it was despicable." Maya stared at his rigid silhouette, her mind struggling to process the words. He wasn't angry at her, he was furious for her. He turned from the window then, and the look in his eyes was a maelstrom of cold, controlled rage. "Marcus isn't just a corporate rival, he's a snake. I knew he was ambitious, but I never thought he would stoop to that kind of personal cruelty." A flicker of hope, fragile and tentative, ignited within her. "So, I'm not fired?" The question came out as a whisper. A humorless, bitter laugh escaped him. "Fire you? Maya, you are the only person in this building who has given me an honest, valuable insight in the last 6 months. Firing you would be the single stupidest business decision I could possibly make." Just as a wave of profound, dizzying relief was about to wash over her, a sharp, insistent buzz emanated from his desk. It was an urgent notification on his computer. He strode over, his brow furrowed, and his expression darkened as he read the email that had just arrived, flagged with the highest level of corporate urgency. "Speak of the devil," he muttered, his voice grim. It seems his little performance in the boardroom was just the opening act. He turned the monitor so she could see. It was a formal notice from the board of directors, attached to which was a meticulously compiled dossier. Marcus's name was in the sender field. With a sickening lurch in her stomach, Maya saw a grainy, black and white photo of herself staring back from the screen. It was her old ID badge photo from her file in the janitorial services subcontracting firm. The file contained everything: her start date, her hourly wage, her employment records, even a copy of the non-disclosure agreement she'd signed. Marcus had laid her entire past bare, framing Julian's decision to hire her not as the discovery of a hidden talent, but as a catastrophic, inexplicable lapse in protocol. The memo was littered with loaded phrases: unprecedented and reckless breach of security, a highly inappropriate personal relationship, potential for corporate espionage. It was a masterfully crafted assassination designed to destroy not only her credibility, but Julian's entire career. The final sentence was a clear declaration of war. We, the undersigned, demand her immediate termination and a formal review of Mr. Davenport's fitness to lead Viridian Trust. As if on cue, the private line on his desk rang, its shrill tones slicing through the tense silence. Julian answered it, his face like granite. "Harrison," he said, acknowledging the chairman of the board. He listened for a long moment, his jaw tightening with every word from the other end. "I understand your position," he said finally, his voice dangerously calm. He hung up without another word. He looked at Maya, his blue eyes stripped of all warmth, leaving only the cold, hard reality of their situation. "That was the board's official ultimatum," he said. "Fire you by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or they will convene an emergency meeting to have us both removed." The world tilted on its axis. The choice was stark, impossible. His career, his reputation, the company his father had built, all weighed against her, a girl from Queens he had known for a few short weeks. The right decision, the only logical decision, was for him to cut her loose. It was the move any sane CEO would make. She felt a profound, aching sadness settle over her, not just for the loss of the job, but for the loss of this fragile, burgeoning partnership she had started to believe in. She sank into one of the chairs opposite his desk, the fight draining out of her. "You should do it," she said, her voice hollow, resigned. "Fire me. Save the company. There's no other choice." Julian began to pace the length of his office, a caged lion against the backdrop of the glittering, indifferent city. The pressure from the board, from his family's legacy, from the sheer weight of his responsibilities, was a tangible force in the room. Firing her was the clean cut, the strategic retreat that would allow him to live to fight another day. It was the path of self-preservation, the one every instinct he had honed in the cutthroat world of finance screamed at him to take. But as he paced, his gaze kept landing on her, sitting small and defeated in the oversized leather chair, yet still possessing a quiet dignity that Marcus Thorne could never hope to tarnish. He thought of her impassioned speech at the investors' dinner, her voice ringing, with an authenticity that had been absent from his boardrooms for years. He thought of her brilliant mind, which saw the human stories behind the cold data. He thought of the way she had made him feel seen. He realized, with a sudden, startling clarity, that cutting her loose wouldn't be saving the company. It would be sacrificing its soul. It would be an admission that the system was right, that a person's worth truly was determined by their title and their pedigree. It would be a betrayal of the very principle his father had championed, that true value is often found in the most overlooked of places. He stopped pacing and stood before her, his decision made. He picked up his phone, and for a terrifying second, she thought he was going to call security. Instead, he dialed her cell. Her phone buzzed in her bag, a strange, surreal echo in the quiet room. "I'm not firing you," he said, his voice resonating with a conviction that sent a jolt through her. She looked up, confused, hope warring with disbelief. "Marcus thinks he's found a weakness, a secret he can use to destroy us. He's wrong. He's found our greatest strength, your perspective, your mind, the fact that you are not one of them. That is our weapon." He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. They were warm, steady. "He wants a war, Maya. We're going to give him one. I'm betting my entire company on you. I'm giving you full, unrestricted C-level access to every server, every file, every encrypted corner of this company's network. Find the truth. I know it's in there." The hours that followed were a frantic, adrenaline-fueled race against the dawn. Julian's office, once a symbol of intimidating power, transformed into their command center. Coffee was brewed, sleeves were rolled up, and the glass walls were soon covered in hastily scribbled notes and diagrams. With Julian's top-level clearance, Maya dove deeper into the acquisition data than she ever had before, slicing through layers of security and firewalls with a speed and intuition that left Julian watching in silent awe. The original $10 million error, the one that had started it all, was her entry point. But now, with full access, she could see it wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a single loose thread in a vast, rotten tapestry. She found more discrepancies, small, cleverly disguised accounting adjustments, backdated invoices, and asset valuations that were subtly but consistently inflated. It was a pattern, elegant in its deception, and it all pointed to a single, horrifying conclusion. "This isn't just a mismanaged company," she breathed, her eyes wide with the enormity of her discovery. "It's a fraud, a massive, systemic fraud. They've cooked the books to make it look like a profitable asset, but it's a house of cards. The real value is a fraction of what they're claiming." She pulled up another file, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The deal is being pushed through by an internal committee here at Viridian. They're the ones who signed off on the due diligence, the ones who ignored all the red flags I'm seeing." She cross-referenced the approval signatures with network activity logs. "And look who chairs the committee," she said, her voice dropping. "Look whose digital signature is on every single fraudulent approval." Staring back at them from the screen was the name, Marcus Thorne. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus's coup wasn't just about ousting Julian. It was about seizing control to push through a disastrous, fraudulent deal from which he clearly stood to gain a massive personal kickback. His attack on her was a desperate, scorched earth tactic to eliminate Julian, the only person with the power to stop him before the truth came out. The $10 million error wasn't a symptom of their incompetence, Julian said, his voice grim. It was the tip of a $100 million iceberg of criminal fraud. The emergency board. Meeting convened at precisely 9 a.m. The atmosphere in the boardroom was arctic. Marcus Thorne sat at the table looking smug and victorious, flanked by the board members he had already swayed to his side. He delivered a sanctimonious speech about duty, honor, and the vital importance of protecting Viridian Trust from the reckless and compromised leadership of Julian Davenport. He used Maya's history as a cleaner to paint a damning picture of impropriety, his every word a carefully polished stone cast in her direction. As he finished and called for a formal vote for Julian's immediate removal, the room was thick with a sense of grim inevitability. It was then that Julian stood up, his presence commanding the absolute attention of the room. He let the silence stretch, his cool gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. "Marcus has presented his version of the facts," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Now, I'd like for the most valuable mind in this company to show you the truth." He turned and gestured toward Maya, who stood near the door. "Ms. Rodriguez, if you would." It was the ultimate gesture of trust, a stunning public reversal of the humiliation she had suffered in this very room. All eyes swiveled to her. This time, she didn't shrink. She walked to the head of the conference table with a calm, unshakable confidence, her worn-out data analytics textbook held in her hand. She placed it on the table. "There's a principle in data science," she began, her voice ringing, "with clarity and authority, called anomaly detection. It's the process of finding the items or events that don't conform to an expected pattern. Most people, when they see one, dismiss it as a mistake. But sometimes a single anomaly isn't a mistake. It's a warning." With a click of a button, the large screen behind her came to life. For the next 20 minutes, she didn't just defend herself. She delivered a masterclass in forensic accounting. She systematically unraveled the entire $100 million fraud, presenting chart after chart of irrefutable data, her logic impeccable and her conclusions devastating. She exposed the shell corporations, the falsified assets, and finally the digital trail of encrypted emails that led directly from the fraudulent company's CFO to a private offshore account owned by one person in the room, Marcus Thorne. The room was utterly silent, the only sound Maya's calm, steady voice narrating the complete and total destruction of a man's career. When she finished, she looked directly at the stunned, ashen-faced Marcus. "Your personal humiliation of me was your biggest mistake. It was the anomaly that forced us to look closer. You weren't just trying to get rid of a CEO. You were trying to silence the one person who had stumbled upon your crime." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, was quietly escorted from the building by security. His career not just over, but destined for a federal investigation. The board, in a state of shock and profound gratitude, issued a unanimous vote of confidence in Julian and offered Maya a formal public apology. That afternoon, she was offered a permanent senior position as the director of the newly created Department of Financial Integrity, a role designed by Julian specifically for her unique talents. The head of HR handed her a new ID badge. It was heavy, permanent, with her name and new, impressive title printed in bold, official text. It was a tangible symbol that she belonged. Later that evening, after the storm had passed, she found Julian in his office, standing by the window just as he had been the night before. But this time, the tension was gone, replaced by a profound sense of shared victory and relief. He turned as she entered, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Director Rodriguez," he said softly. "It has a nice ring to it." She smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with triumph. "I suppose it does." The space between them, once a vast chasm of class and power, and more recently a battlefield charged with desperation, was now something else entirely. It was quiet, intimate, and filled with an unspoken truth. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Maya," he whispered, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "You saved my company. You saved me." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate relief or fleeting passion, but one of deep, soul-shaking recognition, a final, triumphant shattering of every rule that had ever kept them apart. It was the beginning, not of a secret, but of a partnership forged in fire and built on a foundation of unshakable truth. 6 months later, Maya stood at the head of a conference table, not as an object of scorn, but as a respected leader. "The anomaly is never the problem," she told her own team of young, bright-eyed analysts, gesturing to a complex chart on the screen. "It's a question. Our job is to have the courage to ask it." She was confident, articulate, her voice resonating with the hard-won wisdom of her journey. After the meeting, she took the elevator to the rooftop terrace, a private garden oasis overlooking the sprawling city. Julian was already there, waiting for her, leaning against the railing as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They stood side by side, no longer a CEO and his analyst, but 2 equals, looking out at the city that was now, in every sense, theirs to conquer. "My father always said this company was built on finding the hidden value in things," Julian said, his voice quiet, turning to face her. "I spent years looking for it in balance sheets and stock prices. I never realized the most valuable thing I would ever find would be a brilliant, courageous woman with a mop bucket, working on the 50th floor after midnight." He took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, a simple but elegant diamond glittered in the fading light. "I don't want to be your boss anymore, Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be your partner, in everything, always." Tears welled in Maya's eyes as a joyous, radiant smile broke across her face. Looking at the man who had seen past her uniform and into her soul, she gave the easiest, most logical, and most heartfelt answer of her life. Yes,